Well, folks, as you can see, the October mood is in full swing in our home, and I just wanted to do one of these relaxed, rambling talks that I haven't done in a while, kind of old school style, if you will. So I noticed a comment yesterday that got me thinking. So I'm just going to read it to you first. So this was on my recent review of the $60 ninja sword by Musashi. So here we go again. Scal explaining why these kinds of sharpened metal bars are just not that appealing to him because it is Japanese. There's literally not a single video of him with a katana without him telling everyone how he does not like them that much. It's like the most important piece of information ever, apparently. He says it's just his taste, but it sure as hell seems like a katana ruined his life or something. So at first when I saw this, it was just funny, and it was really amusing to see how easily offended somebody apparently gets. But then I thought about it a little bit and realized, that person's got a point, actually. There is something to it, even though the comment is really over the top and really just funny to read. But at the same time, I can kind of understand it. So I originally, when I pointed this out, that I don't have a particular interest in katanas and whatever, it was just as a kind of disclaimer or as clarification in a review to let people know that, hey, I'm not super knowledgeable about these things and I don't claim expertise on katanas, and if my review is a little off or overly negative or whatever, then this is probably why. Just to point out a particular kind of, well, I was going to say personal bias. Well, indifference isn't necessarily bias, but the thing is, when I really think about it and I'm being honest with myself, it's not just indifference, it is also a bit of a bias there. When I look back, it's kind of an odd development. At first, I liked katanas. I mean, the very first semi-functional sword I had was a katana. And I've always appreciated the fact that when you buy a reproduction katana on the market today, 9 times out of 10, it's going to come with a really nice sharp edge. Whereas with European reproductions, it's often a bit of a gamble. But over time, I got more and more exposed to the overhype of Japanese swords on YouTube as well as on the internet elsewhere. And it just started to get annoying after a while. And eventually, it just shifted over to dislike. And for a time, I just really couldn't stand them anymore. Like around 2010, 2012. It was at the point where I was just annoyed by the damn things. Every time I saw them, I was like, damn boring old katana again. And that was also at a time when katana memes were prevalent on the channel. On every video, when testing everything, I was like, oh yeah, a katana could do this better. But as time progressed, I thought, screw this, I'm not a sword hipster. It doesn't matter how popular or overhyped something is. I shouldn't let my opinion be affected by that, and I shouldn't dislike something just because of that. So let's just return to a neutral stance, so to speak, being kind of indifferent. And whenever I do end up doing a review of a katana, I should just point out that, okay, this is not really my thing, so it might affect the review and all of that, which sounds all fine and good, and that's what you're supposed to do as a reviewer. You're supposed to keep the bias to a minimum. But of course, being human, that's not easy. I mean, everybody has confirmation bias. So what that means is, if you have a preconceived notion or an opinion of something, you're actually more likely to seek out information that confirms that opinion, or you're even more likely to remember information that confirms what you already believe. And you're less likely to seek out and remember information that runs counter to that. And as much as I try to avoid that, looking back, I realized that I fell for that every now and then, where I would see a demonstration of a katana that performs really well, and I'd be like, yeah, whatever. And then I'd see a demonstration where a katana fails, and I'd be like, yep, it's not that great after all, see? So it's a bit silly. And the same, unfortunately, happens with everything to everyone. I've seen that also on my channel with regards to European swords, where people would say, longsword, best as ever, and, the katana is useless. And I always cringe when I see stuff like that because, come on, it's nonsense. These things were used in history for a reason. If they didn't work, if they were completely useless, people would not have used them on actual battlefields and in duels, and the katana was used as such. Sure, on the battlefield it wasn't anywhere near as important as polearms, but the same is true in Europe for swords for a long time. Now, this is not to say that all historical weapons are equally good. Every now and then there was something that had quite significant problems. It might have been due to the limitations of the locally available material, or sometimes poor choices were being made. It's also important to keep in mind that depending on your background, you may misjudge something. For example, if you have a background in Kenjutsu, you may jump to completely wrong conclusions about European swords and their quality, and vice versa. If you have a background in HEMA, you may jump to the wrong conclusions about Japanese or Chinese or any other swords, really, because they have certain shortcomings for the style, the techniques that you practice, but of course they were not designed for that, so it doesn't really matter if they're used in a different way. Those drawbacks might not be actual drawbacks. Case in point, my dislike of discards for a long time, which I've now changed my stance on. They wouldn't work as well for European longsword techniques. Well, duh. Again, they're not meant for that, but that doesn't mean they're inferior. Personally, I still prefer crossguards, but I don't dislike discards anymore. The other important thing to point out is that my opinion may be skewed because of what I've had available. Because I didn't have a particular interest in Japanese swords, I wasn't really willing to spend a lot of money on them. Whereas on European swords, I've spent quite a bit. Over $1,000 for Albion swords. For example, I've never handled a single katana in that sort of price range. The highest I think I've had was one made by Ronin Katana, which was, if I remember correctly, like 600. So that was a little different, but that was a Shirasaya, so it was essentially just the bare blade without the full fittings. So if I had tested, say, a $1,500 katana, I might have a different impression. Or might not, who knows? But either way, these things are important to keep in mind. So, long story short, yes, I actually agree that I should stop pointing out every single time I show a Japanese sword that, well, these are not really my thing, and I have no particular interest in them, blah, blah, blah. There's really no point. You can say that you're not trained in the use of something and you haven't handled that many of them to point out an inherent limitation of the review, but it's better to keep it that way. And I will try harder to stay as objective as possible and eliminate these biases as far as I can. And I hope you will do the same. Alright, let's leave it at that. Thanks for watching and have a good one.